What do you need?
Fallout New Vegas has a lot of cut content. Out of all of it though, I don't think that any of these has intrigued me more than the X13's cut VR section. In the final version of Old World Blues, the X13 is where you assemble the Stealth Suit Mk2 and complete the quest Project X13, which tasks you with completing a stealth training section with escalating difficulties in order to upgrade the suit. And this is all that there is to the quest. But through the rightmost door on the first floor, you can enter Stealth Suit Testing 2. This leads the player to a rather out of place feeling room, with a holographic box and proton axe alongside a destroyed terminal accompanied by a body. Reading the note that's next to it says, "With my dying breath, I write that I hate the VR simulation so much. It has killed us, now I will kill it." Elsewhere in the X13, the player can find terminal entries that seemingly reference aspects of the VR sim, such as there being a Jack and the Beanstalk reference in it. Although the removal of the VR section also led to one of the upgrades for the Stealth Suit Mk2 being unobtainable, that being the advanced optics. The only remnants of this in the final game are the image space effect, which slightly brightens the screen when the player crouches, and a line from the Stealth Suit Mk2 that can never end up being heard in the final game.
Test data processed. Advanced optics online.
Thankfully, several early development builds of New Vegas leaked online back in late 2025. The latest of these builds is from February 15th, 2011, meaning that it has early versions of every New Vegas DLC. In this version of Old World Blues, the cut VR section is fully playable. Interestingly, in this version of the DLC, the door that would usually lead to the Repcon infiltration tests instead leads us to an early version of the Holo Room. This version is lacking both the holographic proton axe and box that appear in this room in the final game. The two locations have just been swapped around, but the blue vents outside of where the VR room originally was makes the area feel a lot more cohesive considering that the glowing blue wiring that you can see before entering the room. By interacting with the terminal, if the player doesn't have the Stealth Suit Mk2 equipped, similar to the rep contests, they'll be prompted to equip it, and with it on, the player can begin the simulation. The simulation removes all the player's items, giving them a unique, unequipable VR stealth suit, and transports them to an area completely unlike anything else seen in the final game. Here, you need to retrieve 3 pieces of data from dead agents scattered around the area, all the while avoiding detection from the test dummies. However, these test dummies are killable, as there's a laser rifle and 12.7mm pistol with a silencer on the desk in front of the player when they enter the simulation. Upon defeating one of the test dummies, they have a script which triggers a plasma grenade explosion at their position. And although there's absolutely nothing hinting at it, I wouldn't be surprised if this plasma effect was only a placeholder, as it does feel rather out of place and a bit jarring. This area is also host to a couple unique mechanics, such as a shootable light that becomes destroyed when shot, a shootable bin that lures over the patrolling test dummies, and several gas traps for the player to repair. If the player gets spotted by one of these patrols, they'll need to either go back to the return terminal at the start of the area, or eat the return pod, which is referred to in its editor ID as the return bean, meaning that this is likely the Jack and the Beanstalk reference mentioned in the terminal. Using either of these will transport the player back to the Holo Room, where they'll need to restart the simulation. However, there is an issue here, because if the player repaired a gas trap or shot a light, neither of these will be reverted back to their original state if the player failed the simulation and thus re-entered it. Regardless of this though, upon collecting the 3 pieces of data, the player would be transported back to the holoroom and would have obtained the advanced optics upgrade for the Stealth Suit Mk2. However, even the VR section itself, an already piece of cut content, seemingly has even more cut content that wasn't present in this version. In the files for Old World Blues, there's an unused X13 VR pod that shares the model of the Tranquility Lounges, but has the blue glowy animation that the Operation Anchorage one has. And in this early build, it's moved out of bounds to the right of the Test Chamber 2 entrance. It's named Obsolete VR Pod, and unfortunately its scripts have it set to be marked as destroyed, which was seemingly changed at some point in development, as there's a developer comment on the chair script saying how all of the animation scripts have been moved over to the shell script instead of the chairs. However, upon looking at the shell script, it also just has it marked as destroyed. It's also possible that this section, similar to the other tests in Old World Blues, was intended to have multiple difficulty options. As the test dummy NPCs who patrol the area, their editor ID refers to them as the dummy base. But there's unused NPCs who are instead called test dummy easy, medium, and hard respectively. Each of these also have actual names more fitting for the DLC, however there's nothing left over in the scripts that suggests that this section got to the stage of having multiple difficulty options. As the way the data script is handled, it's set to complete the VR script upon retrieving the 3rd piece of data. And although there's absolutely nothing hinting to its existence, I wouldn't be surprised if it was planned for the player to obtain some sort of helmet or visor for the stealth suit here, as a visor can be seen in some of the posters of the stealth suit in the X13, and the advanced optics upgrade doesn't really make much sense without one. This is easily one of the most unique pieces of content cut from New Vegas in my opinion, which is why I tried to restore it as best as I can. Coincidentally, I had just finished a Stealth Suit Mk2 helmet model that I was planning on uploading to the Nexus, which also led me to restore this area and have my own take on what it might have eventually been. Because, well, I hate myself, I guess. Initially, I restored the advanced optics section as it appeared in the beta files, meaning that the door positions had been swapped, you enter the holoroom, interact with the terminal, and everything plays out the exact same as I just described, with some additional fixes to things like the gas traps and the lights so that they actually reset to their original states when re-entering the test. I also changed the explosion effect to instead be a holographic disintegration one like what was present in Operation Anchorage. Interestingly though, you can just play the ESM files of the early New Vegas DLCs on the PC version of the game, which is how I managed to get the earlier footage. But even with the changes that I made to fix up this area, it still felt incredibly half-baked. So I ended up adding on to it. The first thing I did was add a new room as a buffer between the holo room and the rest of the X13. This room holds the stealth suit helmet, cut VR pod, and the skeleton in front of the broken terminal that appear here in the final game. Upon interacting with the terminal, the player can repair it if their repair skill is above 50, and this allows them to access the VR pod if they have both the Stealth Suit Mk2 equipped and the Stealth Suit helmet. Making the VR pod actually work was probably the biggest headache of this whole mod, and honestly it's still not perfect. If you exit the VR section and leave the pod, it will close again. But as there's only one closing animation, the blue simulation effect still appears on the inside before stopping. If I had to guess, they probably just copied this animation from the sim pod present in Operation Anchorage, but unlike the one in that DLC, this VR pod has glass sections, allowing the player to be able to see inside it when they usually wouldn't be able to. Using the pod will transport you to the holo room, where you can interact with the terminal and start the basic recovery simulation. This tasks you with collecting the 3 pieces of data, and is identical to the simulation present in the earlier version of the DLC. Upon completing it, you'll be granted the advanced optics effect and accompanying stealth suit dialogue. Completing this also allows you to enter the advanced recovery simulation, which is virtually the same with the exception of the NPCs being hostile. This means that they'll now start searching for you if you get put into caution, so they'll occasionally break away from their patrol routes. Completing this will grant the player with a +1 bonus to perception on the helmet. And finally, you have the expert simulation. This replaces the usual patrolling NPCs here with the security holograms that were also unused in the DLC, although admittedly they weren't probably meant to be used here. This version differs from the others as well, as you aren't able to kill these holograms. There's also additional proximity mines placed in certain areas, and completing this will give you a Valiance Radii Accentuator halo effect for the helmet, providing the same minor regeneration buff as well. And overall, this took a lot more work than I originally thought. Fixing the scripts from the early version of the VR section wasn't that bad, but adding a way for the player to leave the VR room and return to the pod, alongside adding in support for the extra difficulty options, ended up taking a lot longer than I originally thought. There are still some minor bugs that need to be fixed, but who knows, by the time you're watching this video, it might be on Nexus. And if it is, I'll update both the description and pinned comment to it. As for restoring this area as present in the beta files, I unfortunately decided to scrap that idea. I wasn't really too comfortable with changing things like the plasma explosion effect, and without the extra difficulty options or VR pod, even with the extra bugs that this had fixed, this area just feels incomplete. So instead of splitting my time between two different versions of the mod, somebody else can make it. And honestly, I'm really surprised that they haven't already. This is easily one of the coolest areas in all of Fallout New Vegas, and it's a shame that it ended up on the cutting room floor. As always though, if you enjoyed, maybe consider liking, subscribing, or if you want to support the channel even more, consider becoming a member. As always though, I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you all next time.